as I mentioned, there were a few key topics when we were meeting with our planning committee that they wanted to see us integrate into the program today. And one of those was micromobility, specifically e-scooters, and just what different localities are doing with that. So we've got that program. Presenting first is going to be Laura Sandt. She is the co-director of Research, Strategy, and Implementation at the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. Dr. Sandt is co-director of the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center, where she focuses on strategy and implementation. She is active in a variety of research areas, including the development and evaluation of community-involved health and injury prevention programs and studies on pedestrian, bicycle safety, and mobility. So, without further ado, Laura Sandt.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. At UNC Highway Safety Research Center, we've got a lot of colleagues in the room today, and a lot of us often go around the country and even the world to share some of our research, so it's really exciting when we get to actually talk with people in our own backyard and not have to travel so far. But John spoke earlier this morning about conversations involving a lot of feelings and sometimes facts. And micromobility is an area where we're seeing a lot of feelings, big thoughts and opinions, but we don't often have a lot of facts, and it's still a very emerging area of research and practice. And so we're excited for Emma and I to get to talk about some of what's happening, some of what we're learning as we really dive into understanding this emerging form of transportation. So how many of you in this room have an e-scooter program in your community? You've seen e-scooters on the streets. Some of you, yes. And how many of you have actually ridden an e-scooter? Oh, great, excellent. So I don't have to explain too much about this form of transportation to everybody here. But when I'm talking about micromobility, I am talking about a larger class of low-speed, lightweight vehicles. There's actually a standard definition that was developed by the Society of Automotive Engineers. But really, I'm going to be talking more about my research area that's been in the realm of e-scooters. And some folks may see the standing scooters, some folks may see the sitting scooters around, but that's what I'm talking about. And what we've been seeing with e-scooters is really rapid growth from around the US since about 2017. Some cities saw these devices really just airlifted in overnight. Others had a little bit more of a process involving the different operators to establish permits and regulations and pilot programs. But what we've heard from the early days of these pilots is that people really see a value in this emerging mode in terms of being able to more easily access transit or other mobility hubs, to get across campus, to get across town more quickly, more efficiently, and really a lot of folks come just to enjoy the experience of riding on an e-scooter. It's tied to a lot of tourism programs that we've seen. So as these programs rise and even rival bike ridership in terms of shared mobility services, we really want to recognize that this is a legitimate mode of transportation that deserves exploration and research. And as we think about the legitimacy and the rise in these scooter programs, we also recognize that there's concerns around safety, perceptions, as well as injuries and what that user experience is like. So this is just some data from North Carolina from the last 3 years, where we know that there are programs now within at least 8 different counties. And we are still seeing an increase in the number of injuries reported to emergency department visits. But when you also consider the rate of the rate of injuries per population, we are seeing that same trend. One thing to note is that as e-scooter programs become more popular, these rates don't necessarily reflect the rate of exposure to injuries. If we're seeing ridership trends go through the roof, we may actually see some improvements in the rate of safety and the rate of injuries. But that's a picture that's still emerging that we're looking to understand better. The study that I was a part of was actually the first study funded by the National Academy of Sciences through their cooperative research program to look at e-scooter safety. And because this was sort of a novel topic to explore, we wanted to use as many different methods as we could to try to understand what was happening with e-scooters and their riders. So we did a review of literature, anything that was published between 2017 and 2020 when we were working on this study, we took a look at. We did a survey of more than 85 cities, asking them about their practices in terms of how they're establishing their micromobility programs. We worked with a group called Populous that had an ongoing sampling of 18 different metro areas to look at ridership trends. We also were able to utilize our North Carolina injury data to understand e-scooter riders in comparison to other active travel forms. And then we also did field observations in 2 cities and interviews with a number of different micromobility program operators. So that's the base of which we established some interesting findings for this research. But generally what we found is that e-scooter riders are truly a class of their own. They don't look like pedestrians per se or bicyclists, but they share some characteristics. They certainly can travel at speeds that are in the same range as bicyclists, but when we look at the population makeup of e-scooter riders, we do see that they skew slightly towards more males than females, skew towards younger ages, more middle income and more white, whereas we have maybe a broader diversity in our pedestrian population, and actually within our bicyclists, maybe a more narrow population. When we look at the injury trends amongst these groups, we see that e-scooter riders also have really their own defining characteristics. More than 90% of injuries occur off the road and don't involve a motor vehicle. However, when we look at the severe injuries and the fatalities, we do see that more than 70 to 75% of fatalities do involve a motor vehicle, which would probably not be a surprise to anyone. When we look at other characteristics of the injury trends in the emergency department crash records, we do see that head injuries tend to be the more common location of injuries, and fractures involving the arm and wrist being the more common types of injuries. Fortunately, we're seeing that overall injury severity rates tend to be lower, likely because, as I said, most of these injuries don't involve a motor vehicle. But at the same time, we have seen that we've had a number of cases of severe traumatic brain injuries, life-altering injuries, especially when head injuries are involved, and a lower rate of helmet use amongst e-scooter riders in relationship to the bike riding population. And one of the issues that we've observed is where these incidents are occurring, and when they are occurring off-road, a lot of times they're occurring in these transition zones where a scooter is making the transition onto a sidewalk, or maybe they're even crossing at a trail or crossing at a rail crossing, and something is happening with the pavement or the maintenance of the roadway in those kinds of locations. So that's one particular aspect of the built environment that has come up in being a contributing factor to the injuries that we're seeing. We also had a lot of people who have very strong opinions about e-scooter riders pointing out some of the behaviors that they tend to see with social riding, stunt riding, wrong way riding, impaired riding. These are all behavioral issues that have come up in a number of conversations and to a lesser degree in the data. But I think we can agree that inexperience is a big part of the injury trends. When we looked at a couple of studies that interviewed patients in hospitals, more than 30% of the people injured, it was their first time riding. And so there is a lot of work to do to help give people safe, low-risk environments to practice e-scooter riding before they get out into maybe more complex environments. The other thing we wanted to point out is that not all of these behaviors necessarily pose serious injury risks to the rider or other people, but also that some of these behaviors can be mitigated as we think about the built environment. So for example, in the study, we went to a number of sites in Nashville and Portland that had very robust e-scooter programs. We gathered video data from a range of different types of roadways. And what we found was that in locations where there was no bike lane, there tended to be high usage of the sidewalk by e-scooter riders. And in locations where there was a bike lane, the opposite was true. We saw much more usage of the bike lane and much less ridership on the sidewalk. So a common complaint that we're hearing is that e-scooters are a threat or a danger to pedestrians because they're on the sidewalks, and we need to tell them where to ride and get them off the sidewalk. And we have definitely seen in the data that incidents between e-scooter riders and pedestrians or bystanders has caused injuries, maybe less than 5% of our injuries. But at the same time, we're seeing that the people who are riding on the sidewalk are riding there for a reason. It's a choice they're making for their own personal safety if they feel discomfort next to higher speed moving traffic. And so this study and a number of studies that we looked at in the literature really did demonstrate that having a low stress bike network with separated and connected bike facilities was actually very beneficial in terms of reducing the number of e-scooter injuries, and it was something that we heard in some of the perception and survey data as well, that people felt more comfortable riding in bike lanes and preferred that to sidewalks when they were given the option. When we did the survey of cities, again, this was a couple of years ago, back during the peak of the pandemic, we were asking them about some of their safety management practices and whether they were working on managing speeds or managing space for e-scooter riders, or if they were working on other approaches to injury prevention. And we really documented a wide range of practices, but at the same time, we documented very few robust evaluations at the time. A lot of them were really still in the peak phase of rolling out pilot programs, feasibility studies, trying to understand their issues, and hadn't really collected a lot of longer-term data. And so this is an area that we really hope that we can continue to learn more about what those most effective practices might look like. But we were able to still draw from the safe system framework to think about what may make e-scooter riders safe when we developed guidance for this project. And you heard in this morning's session from the folks in New Jersey that really the safe system principle recognizes that people are going to make mistakes, they're going to make unsafe choices, they may have inexperience and human limitations, and that we really do need to think about the broader holistic approach that can shift them towards making the right behaviors and giving them an environment where if they are injured, they're not fatally injured, and that we have other protective measures in place. And so thinking about separating e-scooter riders, giving them space to gain experience, thinking about all the different people that may be riding e-scooters, and the data that we might be able to gather from them on how to improve that experience is all part of what we can do collectively to improve that safety for this emerging form of transportation. One of the things I'll also point out is that when we surveyed the 85 communities about if they were managing speeds, they said, oh yes, we're capping the speeds of the e-scooters at 10 miles per hour or 5 miles per hour. And when we ask, are you capping the speeds of the vehicles that are around these forms, they said, oh, that's not in our plan yet. So work to do on thinking about how to manage those speeds and really make this experience better. But this research resulted in a number of different products that we hope can be very useful to people in a variety of positions, whether you're in an agency, you're in an elected position, or you're a member of the public thinking about how to enhance the e-scooter or the micromobility programs in your community. The products that we have talk about some of these fundamental concepts. What do we know about e-scooters and how do we improve safety, and then what kind of data will help us to learn about what we're doing and to know if we're getting it right or what else we need to do to improve safety for all road users. So just a snapshot of what's in that toolbox. We did gather a summary of all the safety management practices that we had been documenting, and that includes looking at things that they were doing to the roadway environment, to regulating vehicles, to managing speeds, to thinking about community engagement and creating that culture of traffic safety, and how they were even identifying crashes and managing post-crash care. Within each of those practices, we documented who's sort of the lead agency that might be responsible for implementing that work, as well as thinking about what we know in terms of the existing level of adoption and the strength of evidence that can be used to support that kind of action. We also provided a tool for assessing risk, and I know many of you are signed up for the workshop tomorrow to think about road safety audits. This is a tool that can very easily be integrated into road safety audits that includes some discussion prompts to think about unique issues that might come up for micromobility riders and specifically e-scooters. And this could also be integrated into routine travel surveys. So there's tools here to help us think about how we can capture and document trends around safety within this toolbox. And again, as I mentioned, about 90% of the injuries are occurring off-road and may or may not involve a motor vehicle. And so we have to really think about the broader environment, not just between the two, between the curbs, and think about maintenance practices and that full transition onto the sidewalk and the other places that people may be riding e-scooters. And so those are some kind of specific things that may, to a degree, also affect bicyclists and pedestrians, but certainly we found in some cases unique to the e-scooter devices. We also documented the ways that people can be improving their data because we recognize that a lot of people have really not been consistently considering e-scooters as a form of transportation, and that there's a lot of missing information that we still need in order to support our decision making and to understand our performance and our progress. So specifically, we provide guidance on how to engage with the folks that are collecting the safety data and making plans for improving safety data. How many of you in the room have heard of the Traffic Records Coordinating Committee in North Carolina? Okay, 3 or 4. These folks make it really important decisions around the data that we invest in and what data we collect. And you know, we talk a lot about measuring what matters, and so we've been trying to make sure that people have, you know, are thinking about e-scooters as they think about the data and collecting information that's going to help us understand the issues. We worked very closely with a large national partnership to actually establish some injury standards that are now being used in hospitals with their emergency department data, but we haven't seen the other injury records systems really keeping pace. So when there's micromobility crashes that do involve a motor vehicle and could be captured in our police records, we still see a pretty wide range in how e-scooters are being classified. Sometimes they're classified as a person on like a motorized wheelchair. We see them classified as a pedestrian or a bicyclist or a motorcycle even. And so that makes it hard for us to see the full picture. But we have had some really important gains, and this has been specific to North Carolina, where as we standardized our data and our case definitions in our healthcare system, we saw a great improvement in capturing those kinds of injuries. So even though we had programs back in 2018, before we had data standards, we were missing a lot of the injuries that were actually occurring with e-scooters. When we introduced the standard ICD-10-CM codes in 2020, we saw a leap in the cases that were identifiable with these codes. And so this isn't to say that the crashes are going up, it's to say that we're actually getting better at measuring the crashes that may have been happening all along. And this kind of data is really important for us if we're trying to make the case on investments and priorities, that we're not missing and undercounting whole classes of roadway users. So there were a lot of folks that worked on this project. I know there's going to be a lot of questions. Happy to talk more after, but I really want to give time to Emma to talk about the work that's going on in the cities around here. And certainly if you have questions about the data and the injury data, UNC is a very happy partner with anybody that's working on injury prevention in this space. And thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Laura. Next up, we have Emma Vinella-Brusher. She is a mobility services planner at the City of Durham. In this role, she oversees micromobility and transportation demand management programs. Prior to her time with the city, Emma worked at the U.S. Department of Transportation Volp Center, where she specialized in projects related to sustainability, transportation, equity, public lands, disaster recovery, and accessibility. So we'll turn it over to Emma.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? Cool. So thank you all for being here. We were very excited to be invited by HSRC to present at this. We have a lot going on in Durham. Our micromobility program has been changing a lot over the last year, so very excited to tell you all a little bit about what we've got going on. So first, as was mentioned, I'm a mobility services planner with the City of Durham's Department of Transportation, and in this role, I manage our shared micromobility program. And as I mentioned, we've had a lot going on, so excited to tell you a little bit about the both cities' micromobility program. So a little bit of history for you. Back in 2017, as Laura mentioned, there was a lot going on. Dockless programs were kind of being dropped in a lot of cities without notice, so in order to get ahead of this, Durham released a survey in order to gather feedback from our residents on whether people would be interested in a micromobility program, and if so, what we would want that to look like. So in November of 2017, we began a one-year pilot program, and through this, we distributed 3 different permits to companies to provide specifically just e-bikes within the city. And I believe actually these next 2 are swapped. October 2018 is when we first officially adopted our ordinance to regulate micromobility, and this really paved the way for a regulated program, which, as Laura mentioned, there's a lot of unpredictable nature of the industry, and so Durham was again able to get ahead of it by regulating from the beginning. So fast forward to June of 2019, our Shared Active Transportation Systems, or SATS program, was officially established. And with this, we were able to have, over a number of years, we've had 7 different providers within the city, largely providing just standing e-scooters. Some of the providers have been around for a few months at a time. Some have been around for a number of years at this point. So we've seen a lot of fluctuation across the time. In February of 2020, we decided to revise our ordinance, just given, again, the changing nature of the industry. Things were kind of in flux. We wanted to get ahead of some of the expected changes with the industry. So we, again, based on some feedback from our residents, from the providers, from local organizations, updated our ordinance. And then fast forward to this year, I was brought on about 1.5 years ago, and we, during this time, have been really revamping our micromobility program. Largely in May, we were able to, again, update our ordinance, and this was a huge update for us. One of the biggest things that we were able to do was really just give the transportation department a lot more control over what it looked like for the operators to be operating within the city of Durham. And we also very excitedly made it much easier to offer seated options within the city, which paved the way to allow for seated scooters, which is something we were really prioritizing, and then reintroducing e-bikes. So since our program officially started in June of 2019, we have seen over 755,000 trips, and this is equal to just under 1 million miles, so we'll have to do something when we actually hit 1 million miles, some sort of celebration. As I mentioned, we've had 7 different companies. The heat map on the right shows you a little bit of what our travel patterns are like. As you can see, we're really concentrated within the downtown area primarily, but we also see some hubs around where our universities are located. So that's Duke's East and West campuses, as well as NCCU's campus a little farther south. As I mentioned, we now on the ground today have 3 different types of scooters. So of vehicles, we have both seated and standing scooters, which do actually fall under the same definition. That's one of the big things we did in our ordinance update. They are both classified as electric scooters within the city of Durham. And if other municipalities want to learn a little bit about how we made that happen, feel free to talk to me after. We also have e-bikes now, and these are just Class 1 pedal assist for now. A little bit of information about this past year. Our fiscal year 2024 ended at the end of June this year. On the ground, we had 2 permittees, so this was Spin and Bird, and both of them were just offering standing scooters. So you can see some of the Spin scooters on the ground in one of our beautiful parking corrals in the photo here. And as you can see, both our ridership and our number of scooters available fluctuates throughout the year. Obviously, Durham's weather is a little more predictable than certain other parts of the country, but we do still see those fluctuations. You can see December, very few trips, whereas in the summer months, fall months, we see a lot more ridership. And I wish that we were seeing 314 trips per vehicle per day, but actually that is 314 trips per day. 314 per vehicle would be a crazy amount, and I don't think any municipalities are seeing that. But we're still seeing a lot of ridership, and so we're very excited about that. But of course, with the success of a program, when you're seeing a lot of ridership, there's a lot of challenges, and Durham is seeing many of the same that other municipalities around the state, around the country are also seeing. So first, and perhaps most common, Laura got into this a lot, but we have the challenge of rider behavior. Durham does regulate a lot of this, and so we require all of our permitted companies to comply with state, city regulations, and also to ensure that their riders themselves are also complying, but there's only so much you can do. You can see on the left-hand side, this is an example of Durham's rules related to shared micromobility, and so this is within the app. Every customer is required to review, make sure they're aware of these and they're following them. Some other cities and some companies do have additional messaging that they incorporate. For example, in the middle, you can see Seattle does require a regular quiz to be done before riders can actually go ahead and take a ride. We also are one of the cities that does have some of the additional messaging around getting rewarded if you are proving that you're wearing a helmet, just an additional verification that hopefully you're not riding while impaired. Some interesting techniques like that. We also do require that our operators offer a number of educational events around the year. So you can see on the right-hand side, this is just an example of a big kickoff event we had recently, actually. And at events like these, our operators are required to do such things as, sharing information, distributing free helmets to our residents, offering test rides in a controlled, safe environment so that folks, when they are then actually out on the streets of Durham, feel a little more confident and a little safer as they're out there. So we are doing what we can, but of course, with challenges in rider behavior, one of the most common frequent implications of this is challenges with pedestrian conflicts. You can see on the left, this is an example of a tweet, and we do unfortunately get some of these throughout the year, just some good photos demonstrating the challenge we have with, occasionally scooters being in the right of way, and, when a scooter is parked on the sidewalk blocking, it's, at the very least, it's an inconvenience, but it's also often even a danger to folks, and so we really want to make sure that that is not happening. So we do appreciate when we get feedback like this from residents, even if it's not always presented in the kindest way. But we do, again, try to get ahead of some of this with in-app messaging, and we are able to regulate certain areas where riders maybe have to go slower. They are not allowed to ride at all. They're not allowed to park, or places where they are incentivized to park. So you can see on the bottom right here, you get a discount if you do park in an officially designated location. So there are certain things that we're able to do, trying to get ahead of some of this and avoid conflicts with pedestrians. But of course, one of the big things that you do need in order to make this happen is the space and the infrastructure in order to accommodate this. So Durham, I think like many cities across the triangle or across the state, we are kind of limited by our infrastructure. So we have been able to make significant progress over the years, but there's always more we can do. One of the big things we're excited about is last fall, we finally brought on our Vision Zero coordinator, and she's been able to make a lot happen already. Durham was one of the first municipalities within the state to actually commit to Vision Zero. And as of this June, we officially passed a resolution through City Council, which really affirmed the city's commitment to Vision Zero. And of course, Vision Zero is not only related to the pedestrians and cyclists and things like that, but also our scooter and e-bike riders that are participating in the shared micromobility program. So we now have an interdepartmental working group, which is working to establish a action plan, and we are hoping that our action plan will be presented to council this December, actually, so keep an eye out. And already the city has committed to reducing both traffic deaths and serious injuries by 50% by 2035, and then eliminating them by 2045. So we are setting some high goals for ourselves, and micromobility, of course, is just one part of this. We also are incorporating neighborhood bike routes. We, over the last year or so, have rolled out 7 miles of neighborhood bike routes, and these are indicated by these fun little signs you can see on the top left of the image. And these are really just low traffic, low speed routes that we're adding signage, we're adding pavement markings, we're adding some fun roundabouts at times, and these are just trying to ensure that we do have designated slower speeds, safer routes for primarily bikers, but also e-scooter riders to take. And we also have had a number of resurfacing projects going on both state and city roads. The bottom right is from one of our big successful engagement events that we had recently. 2 of our major roads in the city, 2 of our most dangerous roads, Roxborough, Mangum, are both currently one-way, and so we are working on determining whether we can convert them to 2-way in order to encourage slower speeds, which of course makes it safer for everyone around. So along with all these infrastructure changes that I mentioned, we do have a lot planned this coming year. We are always continuing to expand and improve our program and always looking for more feedback from our residents. As I mentioned, one of the big things we're excited about is that we do have seated options on the ground now. I believe there may be about 15 on the ground, so we are slowly getting them out there, day by day, hopefully rolling out more. I do believe that we are the first municipality in the state to have seated scooters, so we are very excited to make that happen. And it's been very fun learning from other municipalities and sharing with each other how we can make things like this happen. You can see a beautiful e-bike parked that's in front of our Amtrak station, so encouraging multimodality. We're very excited. One of the big things that we are actually very excited about is, speaking of data needs, Durham does not currently have a curb inventory, and so we really don't necessarily know what we're working with when it comes to opportunities to add additional scooter parking, opportunities to add loading zones, all sorts of things. We are actually just kind of going in blind, and so that makes it challenging to implement these sorts of things that can make the roads safer. So we are very excited. We just brought on a UNC DCRP student who, for her master's project, is going to help us actually create a curb inventory. And so I'm particularly excited because that means that I will be able to go and see where we have unused space that perhaps we can take over and use for parking. We can use for daylighting different intersections to make it safer. Cars can see pedestrians, cyclists, scooter riders more easily. So we have a lot going on in that sense. We also are very excited to move forward thinking about a little more interdepartmental collaboration, in particular thinking about collaborating with our other departments that are also engaging most directly with our most vulnerable residents, because those residents are often the ones who are experiencing the most transportation burdens. And so ensuring that we're having a comprehensive approach, all collaborating together to ensure that we are making it easier for our residents to access everything they need and in a safe way. And that is it for me for today. I have my email there if anyone has any questions. But again, thank you so much for having me, and we're very excited to be invited.
Great, thank you. We'd love for you to have us join us up here on the stage. There's microphones in each of those chairs, and we'll do some question and answer. All right, got the first one here.
Hey, I'm Mike with Oaks and Spokes, and speaking of Durham's ordinance for e-bikes, I was wondering if trying to connect a network of unsafe bike lanes and share lanes, why in the ordinance are e-bikes classified as motor vehicles so they can't use the Greenway network that would be safer?
Is it on now? Okay. Great question. I was thinking someone might ask this. So we did explore opportunities to, within the ordinance, make it safer for people to ride on protected areas. Obviously, the residents and we as city staff are very aware of some of the shortcomings of our infrastructure. And so we do know that it is often safest for our residents to be riding on the sidewalk, on greenway trails. Our previous ordinance explicitly prohibited both of those. We did do our best to see if we could make it possible to ride on the sidewalk outside of the central business district, but we are, of course, limited by not being able to supersede state regulations and things like that. Regarding greenway trails, we were able to at least add some language saying that if there is signage designating it as permitted, then scooters and e-bikes are allowed. That was as far as we could get for now, but we did leave the door open to hopefully make some progress on that front. And we are working with our Department of Parks and Rec and other folks who are a little more knowledgeable about things like that. So we're optimistic that we're gonna be able to make some changes happen. The good news is I think we as a city, again, are aware of the limitations of our infrastructure, and so we are prioritizing enforcing other things that are actually contributing more directly to the safety of our residents.
Okay, so I own my own e-scooter and I wear my helmet when I ride it, and you're talking about lower helmet use, and obviously the rental scooters don't come with a helmet, so people aren't cheering around their helmets. So I was wondering if you guys have thought of any ways to fix that problem and rise the helmet use.
We did document some of that in our study. Like you said, if you're a personal owner of an e-scooter, you might be more likely to use a helmet, but a lot of times when people are renting them, it's maybe a bit more of a spontaneous trip and people aren't always prepared to bring their own helmet. So we do have some documented examples of places like in Vancouver where their micromobility programs come with helmet stations where you can get a helmet, and we've seen sometimes where they actually have the helmet attached to the bike. A lot of people may not be comfortable using a shared helmet. So of course we've also seen other programs where, for example, the city of Austin, they actually worked with their hospitality community to distribute helmets through hotels, knowing that a lot of people were coming in town for the big music festivals. That's where they might be experiencing their first interaction with a micromobility device, is through the airports and through the hotels. And so they were working on distributing helmets in those ways. So we've seen giveaway programs and just other, I think we're still waiting on innovations within the helmet industry to where it's more convenient to carry around your own helmet. But yeah, there's a lot of barriers that need to be overcome to make it really convenient and realistic for people to want to have a helmet with them for any spontaneous ride.
And I think it is much more common for providers outside of the US to have built-in helmets and things like that. We actually did have a provider that is located within Asia presently and is looking to enter the North American market. And they actually have built-in, they collaborated with a helmet provider who has collapsible helmets, and there's a great little attachment, so every scooter does have a helmet available. Of course, there is kind of the ick factor of potentially not knowing who used the helmet ahead of you, and so I do think, you know, culturally perhaps we would maybe have some challenges with that, but there are examples of companies trying to look into this.
This is a question for Emma. Thanks for your presentation. I'm curious about this SPIN educational classes. Is that part of the contract? And then how does SPIN and the other vendors partner with local advocacy and education groups working on ongoing programs around education?
Yeah, so within both our ordinance and our permit itself, we do require our vendors to participate in a certain number of events per year, things like that. We do generally put the burden on them to offer or to hold their own events, but they do also go out and partner with other entities. I know they partner with Duke and NCCU, for example, at some of their back-to-school events and things like that. They're able to partner. I see we have some Bike Durham staff in the audience. SPIN is partnering with Bike Durham and attending an upcoming event that they have, October 13th, I believe, Movable City. Great. They didn't ask me to give it a shout out, but it is a great event. So if you're in town, I recommend you go. SPIN will be there giving out free ride passes, helmets, things like that. So those are generally the types of events that they'll go to. And I will actually mention one of the big things that they do, we do not require this, but we encourage it. They are, at all these events, they are distributing free helmets. And I think this is not a well-known fact, but any users can actually request a helmet from the company. And so they're able to pick these helmets up at events like this or have them mailed to their home. So there's a lot of different types of events they have going on.